And welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Rachel Rubel. It was a volatile week for Turkish-U.S. relations after U.S. President Donald Trump unleashed a Twitter storm that included a direct threat against Turkey. Trump vowed to devastate the Turkish economy if a planned military operation against YPG terrorists in northern Syria went ahead. But less than 24 hours after the tweet, Trump walked back his threat, opting for a more cooperative tone. This back and forth between the NATO allies, although not new, is complicating the U.S.'s planned withdrawal from northern Syria. Courtney Keeley has more.
First came the phone call. In late December, U.S. President Donald Trump announced the complete and immediate withdrawal of U.S. troops from Syria to Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan without consulting his national security team. Then the resignations. U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis wrote in a letter he would resign in February. But Trump pushed him out sooner. Brett McGurk, the top U.S. official leading the coalition against Daesh, also resigned.
So Syria was lost long ago. It was lost long ago. And besides that, we're talking about sand and death. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about, vast wealth. We're talking about sand and death.
Now, with an increasingly isolated and erratic U.S. president, Turkish officials have been left with snubs and threats as they try to keep Trump to his word. A spokesman for Erdogan said U.S. officials said the withdrawal could take place within 120 days.
We will coordinate with everyone, but we won't seek permission from anyone.
Turkey has offered to take over the role of defeating Daesh, pointing out to the success of previous Turkish anti-terrorism military campaigns inside Syria, like Operation Euphrates Shield. But Trump threatened to devastate Turkey's economy if they struck who he called Kurds, referring to the PKK-linked YPG terrorist group. The U.S.'s arming and training of the members of the PKK-linked YPG used to fight Daesh has long been a sticking point between the two countries.
We have said many times that we are not afraid of any threat, and we won't be deterred by any threat. We have said it in the past. Therefore, you cannot achieve anything by threatening Turkey economically. We have to look at how we can coordinate, how we can solve this together.
Release Pastor Andrew Brunson now.
Last August, after Trump doubled steel and aluminum tariffs and sanctioned two senior Turkish officials over a political dispute, the Turkish lira plummeted against the dollar. But this time, another phone call between Trump and Erdogan rapidly de-escalated the standoff for now, and instead started to set the terms for a security zone in northern Syria. Meanwhile, a Daesh suicide bomber in U.S.-patrolled Manbij killed several U.S. personnel and local civilians on Wednesday. But while Turkish and U.S. officials say they will continue to talk, it's unclear what Trump will say or tweet next, and what it could mean for these two NATO allies who remain on shaky ground. Courtney Keeley, Straight Talk.
And joining me now, Taha Arvis, who is a journalist at Daily Sabah, and Helen Sari Ertem, who is an assistant professor specializing in U.S.-Turkish relations at Istanbul Medeniyet University. Thank you both for joining me today. Taha, I want to start with you. The Turkish president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, says he's reached a historic agreement with the U.S. president over a safe zone in Syria. So does this mean that the two sides are on the same page now?
It does. I think this idea, the 20-mile safe zone, was a Turkish idea that was floated 5 years ago. So the U.S. has kind of seen the positive parts of that and have also adopted that. So I think Turkey and the U.S. have not been as close now as they have been for many years. So we're all on the same page now.
Okay, and Helen, Turkey launched Operation Olive Branch. It's been a year now, and in the lead up to that campaign, many critics said that Kurdish civilians would be targeted, and that turned out to not be the case, and Afrin has since been stabilized. What will Turkey need to do to convince other countries, such as the U.S., that it can clear areas of terrorist groups and bring stability to regions such as Afrin?
Looking at Turkish-American relations, what I see is that Turkey is quite determined about what it is doing in the region regarding its Syria policy. So I can say that Turkish policy on Syria is quite clear now when we compare to the United States policy on Syria. So Turkey is doing its best, I think, about the civilians, not to hurt them in the region, including Kurds as well. So I think we will continue as the Turkish side, the government will continue to reflect that it will be quite careful about not hurting the civilians in the region, and it will, I think, continue to guarantee the American side that they can cooperate in a better way.
On Wednesday, 4 Americans were among 19 people killed in a suicide attack in Manbij. Just hours after the attack, U.S. Vice President Mike Pence came out and spoke about U.S. troops in Syria. Let's listen to what he had to say.
We're now actually able to begin to hand off the fight against ISIS in Syria to our coalition partners, and we are bringing our troops home. The caliphate has crumbled and ISIS has been defeated.
Okay, so there you hear the American Vice President saying that the U.S. is able to hand over the fight to the coalition partners in Syria and bringing the troops home, and that the caliphate has crumbled. So is this, Taha, is this the administration just doubling down and sticking to what is this really, it's very chaotic Syria policy?
I think President Trump has done something. He's found out, or he's realized that the previous policy wasn't working. You know, you can't just send a few U.S. soldiers, expect that they can help train a terrorist organization to fight other terrorist organizations. It doesn't really work that way. And so they've kind of seen the light in that sense. So what they've done is, I think he's realized it's a losing fight. You can't just, it's not going to happen haphazardly as it has been in the past. I mean, if you remember, President Obama was the one who called ISIS the JV squad. So he really didn't take it too seriously, and President Trump has it's fallen in his lap. So I think he realizes that handing off most of the heavy lifting to Turkey and other coalition partners will help to resolve the conflict, and that's what they've done now.
Helen, are the U.S.'s conflicting statements on Syria and the White House's overall dysfunction really complicating matters in Syria and giving groups like Daesh the window to reestablish themselves, do you think? I
think there is a huge confusion in Washington regarding the American policy on Syria. We see quite big disagreements between the Pentagon and the State Department, and I think the messages coming from the bureaucrats from Washington visiting Turkey, we see these disagreements between their messages, the hidden messages that they are giving to the Turkish bureaucrats. Between Bolton and Pompeo, for example, we see that they are not quite determined about whether to withdraw from the region or not. So there will be many more problems on the American side in the coming period. But I think Turkey uses this atmosphere in a very clever way to make its policy be understood in a better way on the American side, on the European side, and on the other partners in the region, the regional and global partners, including Iran, Russia as well. So we will see what is going on in the region, but I'm not sure whether the American side will be withdrawing so quickly from the region. They will try to slow down their withdrawal process, quite possibly. That's highly possible in the region, especially after this bombing incident in Syria, in northern Syria. So I think the Turkish side will stay clear, be patient about what they are thinking on Syria's future, and will do their best to give this message to the American side.
So do you think that the mixed messages, conflicting messages from the White House will affect Turkey's military operation in Syria going forward?
I think the key line here is regarding the YPG relations. So if America will insist on protecting their deep relations with YPG in the region, their commitment, their highly strong engagement with this organization, Turkey will have a difficulty, I think, in their relations with the United States. So the key factor here is the YPG. Whether the YPG will be taken out of the west of Euphrates, for example, whether they will be carried to the eastern side of Euphrates, what will be the future of the YPG militants in the region? I think this is the most important point for Turkey at the moment.
Okay, Taha, let's go back to that Trump tweet where he said that he would devastate the Turkish economy if a planned military operation against the YPG in northern Syria went ahead. Last year, we saw the U.S. carry out its threat of targeting Turkey's economy. We saw a huge plunge in the lira. Have the two sides worked out their differences now that, I mean, they're on the same page for now, but have they been able to work out their differences so that we don't see a repeat of this?
I think last year's issue was a political issue. I don't think President Trump has a problem with Turkey at all. I think there were midterm elections. He needed something to galvanize his base, and it was great for him. So he played it as much as he could. And then come November, by the time the midterm elections came, it no longer served his purpose, and that the problem went away. For this instance, the one with the tweet, I remember this tweet coming out and everyone was saying, well, Trump just said he will devastate Turkey, or that the United States will devastate Turkey. And I didn't read it that way at all. I mean, he says Turkey shouldn't go into Syria and fight the YPG, et cetera. He refers that. And then he says, will devastate Turkish economy. So I think I took that to mean if Turkey goes into Syria, then it will, this conflict will devastate the Turkish economy, as it has many other countries who go into wars that they can't win, that are there for a while, because that's what he's trying to imply, that this is a difficult fight. And I said as much on several outlets right before he came out a few hours later, the next day rather, and said, you know, Turkey and the U.S. economic cooperation will be great, or something like that, and then some other tweet where he says, we're going to do great things together, something the exact opposite of what that tweet would have implied. You can't just say, you know, I'm going to do this and that to Turkey, and then, you know, 24 hours later say the exact opposite. Right. It doesn't make any sense, because I don't think that's what he meant, frankly. But as Helen was saying, he has people that he needs to please in the White House. I mean, Bolton is an ideologue. He is the exact opposite of Trump in many instances, but he needs to hire people that will help, you know, kind of circle the wagons around him, frankly. And so that's something that he pleased some of the people in the White House to say that. But there's an ambiguity there. Like I said, he didn't say I will, or the United States will, or the U.S. military will. He said will devastate. So I think it's on purpose. That ambiguity is there on purpose. Okay.
And Helen, do you think this pattern of ambiguity from the White House will continue? Do you think? Do you think we'll see more of this, or do you think this is the last of this? Do you think that
I think this will for sure continue. You know, the foreign policy, because what we are talking is a foreign policy crisis in the United States. They are looking for a grand strategy for the coming years, and they are not determined about what to do. They are not determined about who are the biggest threats, what will be the necessary or the suitable activity to prevent these threats, who are the friends and foes, etc. So they are not clear about their future strategy. They are not clear about the future of their own country as well. That's why we are just seeing a reflection, a minor reflection of that on Turkey. But there are reflections to the whole world.
All right, Helen Sari-Ertem and Taha Arvis, thank you both for joining me today.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Millions of mobile users are eagerly waiting for the benefits that 5G networks are promising to deliver. But with great speed and reliability comes great risk. Consumers, corporations, and governments are increasingly more vulnerable to threats as our world becomes more connected. Turkey is a country that knows this well. Its cyber threats are gaining the attention of officials in Ankara, as Omer Kablan explains.
The rise of cybersecurity threats have put governments across the world on notice. From heists that drained a central bank of tens of millions of dollars to the theft of high-tech blueprints. Hackers can also wreak havoc on a nation's infrastructure and even put lives at risk. But it's protecting a country's most sensitive secrets that is at the heart of the fight. Turkey is one of the most targeted countries for cyber attacks. With nearly 25 million attacks a year, the threat hasn't gone unnoticed in Ankara, where officials have invested in a new cybersecurity system called Octopus to address those dangers. And so far, Turkey's new initiative is working.
Geliştirdiğimiz ahtapot yasılımı bir kuvvet komutanlığımızın karargahına yapılan siber saldırıyı başarıyla engelledi ve gerçekleşecek bir NATO tatbikatına dahil edildi.
Murat Satoğlu is one of the directors at the Scientific and Technological Council of Turkey. He led the team that developed the Octopus cybersecurity system. He cautions that the foreign cybersecurity software that Turkey relies on could also pose a threat.
Many of foreign products are still in use in the country, but in time we have seen there are many backdoors in some of these products. The backdoors are not miscalculations, they are designed to have backdoors and data leakage. So it's important that we know what we are using.
Over the last decade, Turkey has been heavily investing in its own defense technology as it tries to wean itself from foreign arms dealers. That strategy is also being used in the digital world to address cybersecurity threats.
We are part of some critical conflicts within this geography. Within this region, we have to be very conscious about our cybersecurity.
Politically motivated cyber attacks are common. Cyber attacks on Turkey in 2015 disrupted its telecommunications infrastructure and financial systems. Hundreds of websites became inaccessible and 4 major banks were forced to shut down their online services. It's unclear who was behind the attack. In 2016, the Gülenist terror group FETÖ, who Turkey says was responsible for the failed coup of July 2016, was involved in cyber attacks on Turkey's judiciary, including the computers of judges, in an effort to collect confidential information about its members. Estonia was the target of cyber attacks in 2007. They targeted the country's parliament, banks, and media organizations, allegedly over a political dispute with Russia. It led to a complete shutdown of ATMs and online banking services around the country. According to a recent report, cyber attacks were one of the biggest risks facing nations within the next 5 years, second only to extreme weather events and natural disasters. Many countries are working on developing new cybersecurity software, and with 2 wars raging on Turkey's doorstep, the country is pushing ahead with a homegrown strategy to address all threats on all fronts. Ömer Kablan, Straight Talk.
And joining me now is Salih Bıçakçı, a Vice Dean at Kadir Has University, who specializes in cybersecurity. And joining us from London, Madeline Carr, who is a director at the Research Institute for the Science of Cybersecurity. Thank you both for joining me today. Salih, I want to start with you here in the studio with me. Where are most of these cyber attacks originating from, and what are they targeting? Is it the government? Is it average people? Or is it companies?
It's a good but a hard question, because it's not a static and it's not dynamically goes this way. It's changing over time. And what we have in a political ground is really affecting the cyber attacks as well. And if you ask the major actors who are playing over the scene of the cyber domain, I can easily say that the China, Russia, and United States, and both different ways they're interacting between each other. In addition to those, we have also witnessing the cybersecurity firms are portraying the ones of the botnets, which are controlled by a lord, the master, and the master is controlling it from different countries, and these are creating attacks from all over the different parts of the world. Even the political scene could not enough and adequate to explain what is going on the cyber domain. Mostly they are on the government level, but what we have seen recently on the critical infrastructures, because they are the one of the highest vulnerabilities of the countries, even they are focused because of the many problems. They are not newly built, they are all built, and to renew them takes time. And also the satellite and satellite management has an important role in cybersecurity hackings, I can say.
All right, I want to get to Dr. Carr in London. The Turkish government says that it endured 25 million cyber attacks last year. That sounds like a huge number, but put that into context for us. Is that a lot, and what makes Turkey such a target for intrusion?
Well, really, I mean, measuring cybersecurity attacks in itself is quite a contentious issue, because a lot of incidents or intrusions can be simply people probing, or individuals, or they can even be inadvertent intrusions. So separating out which of those 25 million was kind of concerted, intentional effort with some, malicious intent behind it is it's quite difficult. I don't know that Turkey is any more a target than any other country. Every government experiences a high level of cyber incidents all the time. It's a continuous process of trying to defend against them and trying to harden the perimeter of our systems.
I want to ask you about the Chinese company Huawei, which has a big presence here in Turkey, from selling consumer electronics to building large sections of the country's telecommunications network. But recently, it's come under intense global scrutiny, and many countries have taken the U.S.'s lead in denying contracts to Huawei. Is there actual proof or evidence against Huawei, or is it just a U.S. retaliation?
Well, there's no kind of hard evidence in the public domain. That doesn't mean that the intelligence community isn't aware of some compelling evidence. But this relationship between, or this concern about a relationship between private organizations like Huawei and governments goes a long way back. So on the other side, the Chinese government for a long time was very skeptical or cautious of companies like Microsoft or Intel. There's long been this assertion that these private organizations sometimes work closely with their governments in order to build in some kind of backdoors or access that might be needed in a political conflict. But we don't know in the public, we don't know if that's the case with Huawei or not.
I want to get back to Sully here in the studio. I want to ask you about Huawei as well, because it does have a really large presence here in Turkey. Does Turkey see Huawei's commercial activities as a national security threat?
I mean, as far as I know, Turkey is hosting the second largest Huawei headquarters in Asia, following China. I think this gives me a sense that we are not, because the 5G is the main key of the Huawei and what they want to do. The Chinese have noticed something. I mean, the main politics of today's cybersecurity go over the datafication. I mean, the all data that we are collecting on the different facilities and activities are really, really important. And to collect information, you have to have some end users, many end users you can control it. United States, in this sense, has a huge advantage during their established companies like Apple, Microsoft, and Google as well. China doesn't have this, and they started to enlarge their capability to audit and listen and monitor what people are doing and collect messages over top of them. And Huawei is trying to expand this by using the mobile telecommunications sector forcefully over the Wi-Fi and wireless hotspots and all infrastructure part of it, and also end users use cellular phones. And for this reason, I think they're going to expand their presence in the area so much. And Turkey, I don't think so Turkey sees that as a part of it, because Turkey is looking at this balance of power. On the one side, we are going to be either use the American or the European products, or you're going to prefer the Chinese products. It's a trade-off. And is it really rational? That is a question might be asked here. I don't know, because the indictment that we have seen in the United States shows something, but if you look from other perspective, we have no idea what United States is doing China. I'm sure there is a huge debate, and conflict-based warfare is going on in the both states mutually, but it is really hard to follow what is going, because there's a so high level of the attack between each of the parties. Right. If we have added this organized crime group, it becomes to be too complicated.
Well, Dr. Carr, talk to us about how global cybersecurity is different from conventional cybersecurity. Is it getting more and more important in today's world?
It is getting more and more important, and I think it differs in two key ways, really. One of them is that attacks on digital infrastructure are really attacks on critical infrastructure. So not just critical infrastructure in the kind of conventional sense that we think about utilities or transport systems, but really increasingly everything we do on a day-to-day basis, our business, our commerce, our communications is carried out on digital platforms. And so attacking those platforms really undermines the capacity of a society to function. That's different from conventional security, which may see a kind of kinetic attack. But another way that it differs is that it's very, very difficult, as this conversation about Huawei and the Chinese government shows, it's very, very difficult to kind of ascertain in this complex ecosystem of public and private actors where one begins and the other ends. So governments now outsource so much of their IT systems. They outsource, many of them outsource their offensive and defensive cyber operations. We have this kind of confluence of military contractors and governments working hand in hand. And so it's really difficult to peel apart when incidents are a state-based attack or when they're coming from an organized group or an individual.
All right, certainly a very important subject. Dr. Madeline Carr, thank you so much, and Saleh Bachakcha, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
That's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Rachel Rubel. If you have any comments, do share them with us on Twitter with #StraightTalk. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.